The attacks from the Israeli army on Palestinians on Monday that left more than 50 people dead and over 2,500 injured has sparked outrage globally. In fact, the South African government withdrew its ambassador from Israel, and calls are growing for government to shut down the Jewish state's embassy in South Africa. According to reports, the Palestine Solidarity Alliance, the SACP and Numsa have requested government to impose economic sanctions against Israel and to cut all business ties. Well, joining us now is a policy fellow from the Institute of Race Relations, Sara Gon. Sara, welcome. Good to have you here on the program. Let's start off and look at the relationship between Israel and South Africa in terms of the economy and economically, imports, exports. How good is it?
It's very small. The South Africa exports about 2% of its exports of all its exports to Israel,
okay.
And Israel sells to South Africa about 2.9 billion rands worth. So it is really on the small side. Also, Israel's foreign direct investment into South Africa is sort of 0.15%. But what's interesting about that figure is that it's grown by 6 times in a 15-year period. And it's the only FDI into South Africa that's currently growing when everyone else is shrinking.
Is shrinking, yeah.
I think the issue is not so, it's probably less what it would do to the economic relationship as to the loss of the potential economic relationship, because Israel has a lot to offer South Africa. It shares a lot of the sort of weather, geographic, dry aspects that South Africa struggles with, and it has a lot of the technology to deal with that.
So in terms of economically, and we do look at economics at this point, would it have a detrimental effect on South Africa? As you say, this is possibly one of our only growing industries, and yet, countries, and yet we are looking at really now cutting ties.
I think the problem is for South Africa, for example, the exchange of tourists is about 25,000 per annum, but Israeli tourists spend about 500 million rand in South Africa per year. So that's not only income, but it'll have a ramification for jobs, etc. And Israel being a very small country, Israelis always are travellers. They're always looking for places to go.
Yeah.
So the problem, of course, is that it's very much easier for Israel to replace the economic downside for itself, because huge numbers of other countries are investing in Israel, but it's not that easy for South Africa to replace what it receives from Israel. And interestingly, the other BRICS countries all have growing economic relations with Israel, and they're very disparate. It's Russia, it's China, India, Brazil. So South Africa is the sort of outlier in that regard.
But if we look at the moves from what we did, and it was a very, very fast and swift move that happened on the day, as soon as this outbreak of violence occurred, South Africa taking the stand that they were withdrawing our ambassador from Israel. Was this a little bit too hasty, or did we act in accordance to our policies and where we've always stood with Israel?
I think it was certainly hasty, but that's what the ANC has indicated it would do. This was obviously the trigger that brought it forward much more quickly. The problem is that the current government view, say for the last 5, 6, 7 years, has been very much, it's been a black and white view. It's very pro-Palestinian, anti-Israel, and their position accords with that philosophy. Whereas the situation is so much more complex and so complicated on levels that even South Africa, with our history, don't necessarily appreciate. But it's very much a philosophy. It's a philosophy that indicates our left-wing position and our support for the underdog, come what may. And the problem partly is that even sort of the flux in the Arab world is changing attitudes to how it deals with Israel and Palestine and the Palestinians, and it's not as cut and dried as it once was. Alliances are being forged in unexpected places, and particularly with Sunni Sunni Islam countries
Yeah.
who see the bigger threat, much bigger threat from Shia Iran. So that's changing relationships enormously.
One of the reasons that the South African government keeps on giving is the fact that there are so many similarities between what South Africa went through during the apartheid years and drawing that comparison. Do you see the comparison? I mean, do you think that this is reason enough? And if not, why?
Okay. I understand how the comparison's been drawn, but I don't think the comparison is real. And I think the reason is that for example, the separation, the borders between West Bank on the one hand, Gaza on the other, it's about a dispute over whether a land becomes somebody's country or remains somebody else's country or not. And it's been a conflict in which, let's take Hamas for example, with which the government has a very strong relationship. Hamas's ideology is the destruction of the state of Israel. And I know that sort of sounds very melodramatic, but it is, and it doesn't deny it. And the problem is that from the Israeli standpoint, we say, well, we can't allow ourselves to be destroyed. So sometimes the measures they will take to defend will seem extreme. So it does depend entirely on which side you look at it. But I don't think it's fair to make the comparison because it actually is very different and needs to be looked at very, very differently.
Yeah. All right, let's leave it there. But thank you for coming in, giving us your views. I think this morning we really have taken a look at the situation in Palestine and Israel, and also South Africa's policy towards all of that, from having all perspectives here on the program. You know, you're more than willing to write to us and give us your views. We look forward to hearing from you. But this was Sara Gon, a policy fellow from the Institute of Race Relations, speaking to us about the economic impact sanctions against Israel will have on the South African economy and other issues. Let's take a break. More serious issues after this. Palesa talking about the Commission of Gender Equality appealing to the Department of Sports and Recreation to investigate soccer academies across the country when it comes to the abuse of young boys. Stay tuned.